U.S. Navy Band and Sea Chanters. Hi, Nawal. Abu Hamda. Welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 56 state and territorial flags of the United States carried by your United States Navy Ceremonial Guard.
Don't worry, we'll have some Palestinian music in a few minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the presentation of colors and remain standing for our national anthem. Retire the colors. Please be seated. Sit back and enjoy the show. When my friend
the time has come. Raise the roof and have some fun. Don't wait, do what? Let the music play, everybody sing.
Please be seated. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Oh, well, my friends, the time has come. Raise the roof and have some fun. Don't wait, do what? Let the music play, everybody sing, everybody dance. Lose yourself in wild romance. We're going to crumble, fiesta forever. Come on and sing it along. We're going to crumble, fiesta forever. Come on and sing it all night long. All night long. All night, all night long. All night long. Oh, yeah. People dancing all in the street. See the rhythm all in their feet. Like it's rude, wild and sweet. So let the music play. Feel it in your heart and feel it in your soul. Let the music take control. We're going to light, fiesta forever. Come on and sing my song. We're going to light, fiesta forever. Come on and sing my song. All night long, all night, all night long, all night, all night long, all night long. Yeah. Once you get started, you can't sit down. So come join the fun, it's in merry-go-round. Everyone's dancing their troubles away. So come join the party, see how we play. Tambolita se te voy a where's the party all we know. Tambolita se te voy a Tambolita se te voy a inside my bones. It goes electric, baby, when I turn it on. All through my city, all through my home. We fly it up, no ceiling when we in high zone. 'Cause I got that sunshine in my pocket, got that good soul in my feet, and that hot blood in my body. And it drops, ooh, I can't take my eyes off of it. Moving so phenomenally, all about the way we rock it. So don't stop, and until the lights when everything goes. When I'm getting you close, when we move, and you already know. So just imagine, Washington, D.C., put your hands together. I can see that you when you dance, dance, dance. Feeling good, good, creeping up on you. So just dance, dance, dance. All those things I shouldn't do, but you dance, dance, dance. And ain't nobody leaving, so just keep dancing. Yes, yeah. Come on, so just dance, dance, dance. Happy dancers, just dance, dance, dance. Come on, so just dance, dance, dance. Keep dancing.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Zoom Palestine. Aren't those guys great? Now, who would want to kill those fabulous sailors? Oh, Phil, you just missed the sailors singing patriotic songs and then some really cool music. So I'll pick them up again later on. But Muhammad Mulkminin is on Facebook, and somebody whose name in Arabic I think I can figure out, but I'm try. And Nawal Abdul Hamda is on Facebook. So those sailors were so fabulous. Who would want to kill those guys? It's really a shame when we read about the whole story. And actually, putting this program together, I learned more stuff about what went on. So welcome, Phil. Good to have you with us. And if you'd be kind enough to, do you want to say hi, anything yet, or do you want to wait till later?
I'm all ears. I can wait.
Okay, great. We have the chaplain from the USS Liberty coming to be interviewed. I don't know if he'll get on Zoom, but I have his phone. He's in Billings, Montana. So I'll be calling him if he doesn't get himself on Facebook. I'm glad you got on. I was worried that there was some screw up. Anyhow, so today we're going to be talking about the USS Liberty, and we're going to discuss it from a variety of points of view that we may not be fully aware of everything. So just to give you a little background on it, I'm going to show some pictures and then read read from the let me see. Let me go back and get off the let me get off this the video I have on. See if I can. Yeah. Okay. There we go. Yeah. So, well, first of all, I wanted to play while we're waiting for a few more people to come on. I have some very cool Palestinian hip hop music, and it comes from this group called DAM, and they're a pioneering hip hop band, DAM. They've been around since the early 2000s. They come from Lod, the original, city where the airport is now. And they rapped about poverty, racism, and discrimination faced by Palestinians. So we can listen to them while we're waiting for more people to come on. They talk about the discrimination faced by Palestinian citizens of Israel. So Phil, you may have heard about them while you were there. And one of the songs here, I think, is really the grace. Who's the terrorist? I'm the terrorist. How could I be the terrorist when you've taken my land? I think that whole business of the narrative that the Palestinians are the bad guys and they are the terrorists is something that's very problematic. And those of us who know the story about what's going on, we question very much the narrative of Palestinians as the terrorists. So let's share this with you. I think you'll find it pretty interesting. Let me. All right, this is starts out with
50 years of assault on Palestinian rights. I think they're the most terrorized, or at least with the Iraqi people, they're the most terrorized people on earth, and have been for so many years. Practically every Palestinian lives in constant harassment, threat of violence, humiliation. Been that way for a long, long time.
It's saying, مين الهابي؟
أنا إرهابي، كيف إرهابي وأنا عايش ببلادي؟ مين إرهابي؟ أنت إرهابي، ماكلني وأنا عايش ببلادي، قتلني زي ما قتلت أجدادي، أجل القانون على الفاضي ما أنت يا عدو بتلعب دور الشاهد. القائد المحامي والقاضي علي قاضي نهاية باجي حلمك ينقل فوق معنى آلية حلمك لآلية تصير بالمقابر أكترية ديمقراطية والله انكم ناسية كفر مغتصبتوا النفس العربية ابنك ولدك ولد اسمه عملية انفجارية وهنا ديت إرهابية يعني ضربتني وبكيت سبقني واشتكيت لما ذكرتك انك بديت نطيت وحكيت ما انتوا بتخلوا ولاد صغير محجار مالهمش عين يضبوهم بالدار ايش انه نسيت انه سحب ضب الاهل تحت الاشجار وهلا لما رجع الفار بتلاقيني ارهابي مين ارهابي؟ انا ارهابي كيف ارهابي وانا عايش في بلادي مين ارهابي؟ انت ارهابي ما كلني وانا عايش في بلادي ليش ارهابي؟ عشان دمي مش هادي حامي عشان رافع راسي وارض بلادي قتلوا حبايبي انا لحالي اهلي اتشردوا راح اضل انادي انا مش ضد السلام السلام ضدي علي بده يهدي تراثي بده يمحي واللي بيحكي كلمه بشد ورا همه بيكون زلمه تعملوا منه همه ومين انتوا لسه انت خبرتوا اطلعوا قد شتلتوا قد شتمتوا امياتنا بيبكوا ابياتنا بيشكوا اراضينا بيخطفوا انا بقولكم مين انتوا خبرتوا في دلع احنا كبرنا فقر من كبر في وسع ومن كبر في شحر صار في داعي عملتوا منه اجرامي وانت يا ارهابي بتناديني ارهابي مين ارهابي؟ انا ارهابي كيف ارهابي وانا عايش ببلادي مين ارهابي؟ انت ارهابي ما كلني وانا عايش ببلادي امتى ببطل ارهابي؟ لما تضربني كف واديك خط تاني كيف تتوقع مني اشكر اللي اتاني تعرف ايش انت قولي كيف بدك اياني راكع ركب يدين ربطات عيون بالارض جثث التتان بيوت مهدومه عائلات مشردات اطفال يتيمه حريه كلبشات انت عمر انت بطل احنا بنقبر ما علينا بنصبر وجعنا بنسطر اهم شيء انك تحس بامان تريح وتسيب لنا الالام ما هو دمنا دم كلاب حتى لا لما الكلب يموت في الرفق بالحيوان يعني دمنا ارخص من دم الكلاب لا دمي غالي راح ادافع عن حالي لو تبرتيني ارهابي مين 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 ارهابي انت ارهابي شوف الشجرة شوف مش حرام
Wasn't that great? I like this song because I can understand most of the Arabic, but it's a really great song. So we have a few more people on Facebook Live, but nobody else coming in on Zoom yet. I hope the chaplain can get in on Zoom. But anyhow, what we're going to do now is give some basic background of the incident. I found this wonderful article by James Banford from a book called Body of Secrets, and I'm going to read it to you while I show you some. First of all, I wanted to mention breaking news just came up. The Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is out from power as Israel's government proved a precarious coalition government led by Naftali Bennett. Well, of course, we don't know if this is going to be good for Palestinians or just, a change of masters. And it says, Mr. Bennett, former aide to Mr. Nahu, opposes a Palestinian state, and Yair Lapid, who's set to take Bennett's place after 2 years, will lead an 8-party alliance that agrees on little, but a desire to oust Mr. Netanyahu, the longest serving leader in the country's history, and to end Israel's lengthy political gridlock. Well, I doubt that Israelis are going to suddenly unify about anything, particularly their government. So probably next week, we'll be talking a little bit about the Palestinian reaction to it. And they're having that Flag Day march this week as well. So I'm sure we'll see some more developments having to do with it. But meanwhile, while I show you some images of the USS Liberty, I'm going to read you this really fascinating article that just blew my mind, to be honest. So here it goes. It's from his book called Body of Secrets, and this is a picture of the ship after the bombing. And Early in the morning of Thursday, June 8th, 1967, before some of you who are watching were probably alive, the first rays of the sun spilled softly over the Sinai's blonde waves of sand. A little more than a dozen miles north in the choppy eastern sea, the USS Liberty headed eastward. But the calmness was like quicksand, deceptive, inviting, and friendly until it was too late. As the Liberty passed the desert town of El Arish, it was being closely watched. I'm going to adjust my camera so Facebook Live people have a better view. About 4,000 feet above was an Israeli, hi, welcome Norby. About 4,000, you missed the great music from the Navy and from the Palestinians, but it'll be on the YouTube. About 4,000 feet above was an Israeli reconnaissance aircraft. At 6:05 a.m., the observer on the plane reported back to Israel Naval Headquarters. What we could see were the letters written on that ship, and we gave these letters to ground control, he said. The letters, as you can see in the picture, were GTR-5, the Liberty's identification. GTR stood for General Technical Research, which was a cover name for the National Security Agency's fleet of spy ships. And my cousin was an intelligence officer on that ship. The Liberty was in dangerous waters at a dangerous time. The Six-Day War, in which Israeli air and ground forces launched a massive attack on Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, was raging. Fearing involvement in a Middle East war, the U.S. Joint Chief of Staffs needed rapid intelligence on the ground situation in Israel. Ships were considered the best option for the job. They could sail relatively close and pick up the most important signals. Also, unlike aircraft, they could remain on station for weeks at a time, eavesdropping, locating transmitters, and analyzing the intelligence. And so the Liberty, which was large, fast, and had been stationed relatively close on the Ivory Coast in West Africa, had been ordered in. Throughout the morning, the ship sailed on, and with reconnaissance repeated at approximately 30-minute intervals. At one point, an Israeli Air Force plane circled the ship and headed back toward the Sinai. One of the crew members said it had a big Star of David on it and was flying just a little over our mast. I was actually able to wave to the co-pilot. He waved back and actually smiled at me. I could see him that well. There's no question about it. They had seen the ship's markings and the American flag. They could damn near see my rank. The underway flag was definitely flying, especially when you're close to a war zone. By 9:50 a.m., the minaret at Al Arash could be seen with the naked eye, like a solitary mast in a sea of sand. Although no one on the ship knew it at the time, the Liberty had suddenly trespassed into a private horror. At that very moment, near the minaret, Israeli forces were engaged in a criminal slaughter. 3 days after Israel had launched the Six-Day War, Egyptian prisoners in the Sinai had become a nuisance. There was no place to house them, not enough Israelis to watch them, and few vehicles to transport them to prison camps. But it was another way to deal with them. As the Liberty sat within eyeshot of El Arish, eavesdropping on surrounding communications, Israeli soldiers turned the town into a slaughterhouse, systematically butchering their prisoners. An eyewitness recounted how in the shadow of the El Arish mosque, they lined up about 60 unarmed Egyptian prisoners, hands tied behind their backs, and then opened fire with machine guns until the pale desert sand turned red. This and other war crimes were just some of the secrets Israel had sought to conceal since the start of the conflict. An essential element in the Israeli battle plan seemed to have been to hide much of the war behind a carefully constructed curtain of lies. Lies about the Egyptian threat, lies about who started the war, lies to the US president, lies to the UN Security Council, lies to the press, lies to the public. Thus, as American naval historian Richard K. Smith noted, any instrument which sought to penetrate this smoke screen so carefully thrown around the normal, quote, fog of war would have to be frustrated. Yet into this sea of deception and slaughter sailed the USS Liberty, an enormous spy factory with the latest eavesdropping gear. About noon, as the Liberty was again in sight of El Arish while the massacres were taking place, an army commander there reported that a ship was shelling them from the sea. But that was impossible. The only ship in the vicinity was the Liberty, and she was eavesdropping, not shooting. As any observer would have recognized, the ship was a tired old Second World War II vessel crawling with antennae and unthreatening to anyone unless it was their secrets, not their lives they wanted to protect. By then, the Israeli Navy and Air Force had conducted more than 6 hours of close surveillance of the Liberty off the Sinai and must have positively identified it as an American electronic spy ship. They knew she was the only military ship in the area. Nevertheless, the order was given to kill her, and at 12:05 p.m., three motor torpedoes, rockets from boats from the port of Ashdod, about 50 miles away, departed. Israeli Air Force fighters loaded with 50 millimeter cannon ammunition, rockets, and napalm followed. Without warning, the Israeli jet Sweat-wing Dassault Mirage 3Cs struck. On board Liberty, Lieutenant Painter observed that the aircraft had absolutely no markings, their identity unclear. He then attempted to reach the man manning the gun mounts, but it was too late. I was trying to contact those two kids, he recalled, and I saw them both. Well, I didn't actually see them as much. They were blown apart, but I saw the whole aircraft strafe the bridge area. Um, and we went up into smoke and scattered metal. The quartermaster petty officer of the third class, Pollard, was standing next to me and he was hit. The Mirage raked the ship from bow to stern with armor-piercing lead. A bomb exploded near the whaleboat aft of the bridge, and those in the pilot house and the bridge were thrown from their fleet. Commander William McGonigal grabbed the engine order annunciator and rang up full flank ahead. In the communication spaces, oh, Ron is here. Wonderful, great. And my cousin is here, Robert Casal. Wonderful. Oh, how great. Two guys in the
Hi, Patty. Thanks.
fabulous. Okay.
I'm having to listen to this now.
Okay.
Yeah, I do. I got my suit and tie on. Sitting here in my drawers.
Okay, just mute yourself. Okay, thanks.
I love you.
Love you too.
Bye.
Alman shouted, we are under attack by unidentified jet aircraft and require immediate assistance. Great, wonderful, she's burning, said an Israeli pilot. At 09, the aircraft carrier USS Saratoga operating near Crete acknowledged Liberty's cry for help. I am standing by for further traffic signal. Can everybody mute themselves, please? After taking out the gun mounts, the Israeli fighter pilots turned their attention to the antennae, so the ship could not call for help. Interceptions, which is a violation of the planes attacked the bridge, killing instantly the ship's executive officer.
This is the hole from the torpedo. All we have.
Mute everybody. Okay. All right, I'm going to mute everybody for now. Okay. So they attacked the antennae, so they couldn't call for help. Then the planes attacked the bridge, killing instantly the ship's executive officer. With the Liberty now deaf, blind, and silenced, unable to call for help or move, the Israeli pilots proceeded to kill her. Designed to punch holes in the toughest tanks, their shells tore through the Liberty Liberty steel plating like hot nails through butter, exploding into jagged bits of shrapnel and butchering men deep in their living quarters. Remember, this was an old World War II ship. As the slaughter continued, neither the Israelis nor the Liberty crew had any idea that witnesses were present high above. That is until now we know. According to information recently obtained, for nearly 35 years, the NSA has hidden the fact, and this is mind-blowing, that one of its planes, a Navy EC-121 Ferret, was overhead at the time of the incident, eavesdropping on what was going on below. The interceptions from that plane, which answers some of the key questions about the attack, are among the NSA's deepest secrets. The Ferret had taken off from Athens for its regular patrol of Eastern Mediterranean about the time that the air attack was getting underway. The Navy chief petty officer heard one of the other Hebrew linguists on the plane excitedly trying to get his attention on the secure intercom. "Hey, chief," he shouted, "I've got really odd activity." This is in Hebrew, on the UHF. "They mentioned an American flag. I don't know what's going on." Nowicki asked the linguist for the frequency and rolled up to it. "Sure as the devil," said Nowicki. "Israeli aircraft were completing an attack on some object." I alerted the evaluator, giving him sparse details, adding that we had no idea what was taking place. Deep down in the Liberty, Terry McFarland, head encased in earphones, was vaguely aware of flickers of light coming through the bulkhead. He had no idea that they were armor-piercing tracer bullets slicing through the ship's skin. Larry Weaver had run to his general headquarters station, but it was located on an old helicopter pad that left him exposed and vulnerable. He grabbed a day shipmate and pushed him into a safe corner. I said, "Fred, stay here. You've just got to, because he's coming up the center." Weaver recalled, "I got into a fetal position, and before I looked up, I saw the American flag, and that's the last thing I saw before I was hit. I closed my eyes. I was hit by a rocket, and cannon fire blew 2.5 feet of my colon, and I received over 100 shrapnel wounds. It blew me up into the air about 4.5 feet, blood everywhere. And I turned around, torn and mutilated bodies everywhere." He said, "Horrible sight." As soon as the Mirages pulled away, they were replaced by Super Mystère fighters, which raked the ship. Again, a later analysis showed 821 separate hits on the hull and superstructure. Now, in addition to rocket, cannon, and machine gun fire, the Mystères attacked with 1,000-pound bombs and napalm. And Chaplain Ron is going to talk to us about why he thinks it's a miracle that any of them survived. We'll hear him after this. Deafening explosions tore through the ship, and the bridge disappeared, an orange and black ball. Lying wounded by shrapnel, his blood draining into his shoe, was Commander McGonigal. Seconds later, the fighters were back, flesh fused with iron, as more strafing was followed by more rockets, more napalm. As the last fighter departed, having emptied out its onboard armory, turning the Liberty's hull into a flaming mash of gray Swiss cheese, sailors left mutilated shipmates on to make makeshift stretchers of pipe frame and chicken wire. Damaged control crews pushed through the passageways of suffocating smoke and blistering heat, and Chief Petty Officer's lounge was converted into a macabre sea of blood-soaked mattresses and shattered bodies. After landing back at the Athens airport, Nowicki and the intercept crew were brought directly to the proceeding center. By the time we arrived at the USA 51J compound, he said, "Radical reports are coming in to the station about the attack on the USS Liberty." The NSA civilians took our tapes and began transcribing. It's pretty clear that Israeli aircraft and motor torpedo boats attacked a ship in the East Med. Although the attackers never gave a name or a hull number, the ship was identified as flying an American flag. We concluded the ship was the USS Liberty. 50 minutes after the first shells tore into the ship, the attack was still going on. and the aircraft carrier USS America, cruising near Crete, was ordered to launch 4 armed A-4 Skyhawks. At the same time, the carrier USS Saratoga was also told to send 4 armed A-1 attack planes to defend the ship. Sending aircraft to cover you, they were told. Surface units on their way. But at that moment in Washington, President Johnson was at his desk on the phone, alternately shouting at congressional leaders and coaxing them to support his position on several pieces of legislation. 4 minutes later, he was interrupted. The Liberty has been torpedoed in the Mediterranean, Rostow told Johnson. The NSA's worst fears have come true. After considerations of personal safety, said the deputy director Tortella, one of my immediate concerns, considering the depth of the water and distance of the ship offshore, had to do with classified materials on board. He got on the phone to talk to the joint the Navy director that all the written material be burned if all possible and the electronic equipment is salvaged. But Tortella was not prepared for what he heard. According to NSA documents, top secret, he was told that some senior officials in Washington wanted above all to protect Israel from embarrassment. Captain Vineyard mentioned this during his conversation. The consideration was then being given by some unnamed Washington authorities to sink the Liberty in order that newspaper men would be unable to photograph her and thus inflame public opinion against the Israelis. A cover story for Liberty was then devised, sent out, that she was a communications research ship that was diverted from her research assignment to provide it in communication relay links with embassies around the Mediterranean. But on the Liberty, black smoke was still escaping through the more than 800 holes in the hull, and the effort to hush up the incident had already begun. Within hours of the attack, which left 34 men dead and 2/3 of the rest of the crew wounded, Israel asked President Johnson to quietly bury the incident. Embassy Tel Aviv said a highly secret, very limited distribution message to State Department, urging de-emphasis of publicity, since the proximity of the vessel to the scene of conflict was fuel for Arab suspicions that the U.S. was aiding Israel. Shortly thereafter, a total news ban was ordered by the Pentagon. No one was able to say anything about the attack. And it was a total cover-up, which we're going to see more about. There was never a congressional investigation. And the veterans who were, of course, outraged about everything, formed the group, which then they, and I'll show you their website. Let me see if I can get onto their website. Hold on. The Veterans, USS Liberty Veterans Association website. I'll share that image with you in a minute. Because the men on the ship knew that what had happened and were horrified that there was never any investigation. And worse, that the planes that were sent to help them were turned back. And on their website of the USS Liberty Veterans Association, they have a lot of very interesting information. And they point out that the Sixth Fleet abandoned them and the plane sent for them. And they list the war crimes that were involved in this, which included, besides the attack, these were committed during the attack, jamming their radios, a war crime, use of unmarked aircraft to attack, war crime, deliberate machine gunning of life rafts. They had dropped over the side to abandon, in case they had to abandon ship, and the recall of 2 flights of rescue aircraft that had been launched from the Sixth Fleet aircraft carriers. So we have a horrific situation that still to this date has not been addressed by Congress. So what I'm going to ask is for Chaplain Ron to come on and join us. Can you unmute let me see, can you unmute yourself, Ron? You just have to hit on the lower part of the screen where it says mute, if you could hit it. So you can, because I muted you there, thank you. So let me introduce you to everybody. This is Chaplain Ron Kukal from Nebraska. Originally a little town called Rushville. And he told me before the meeting, he joined the Navy when he was 18 and was promoted and was ready to take the test for Chief Petty Officer at the time of the attack. After 8 years of service, he loved the Navy, but his career was interrupted by the attack. He ended up having to start his own business. He had to leave, became a licensed electrician, but he was diagnosed with PTSD, which most of the gentlemen on the ship endured and suffered after he was discharged, and also with a lower back injury. But he was able to work enough, but he's now retired after contracting and working for the VA. And he was assigned as the supervisor of specialized communications aboard the ship. And he was situated about 60 feet from the torpedo when it exploded during the attack, thus his belief that divine intervention kept that ship afloat and the survivors alive and saved the ship, because it really should have sunk. So Chaplain Ron, welcome to Zoom Palestine. And would you share with us your experience of that day when it happened?
Well, thank you for having me. Is Bob on here too, Bob Cassell?
He is, yeah.
Okay. All righty. I haven't talked to him in years. First of all, there's never been any ulterior motive for what the USS Liberty survivors have been doing. There's been none whatsoever. The bottom line has always been a congressional investigation, which we should have had and never got. I'd like to make that very clear before I start, because let's see, I've been at this professor for about 54 years now, and I never have gotten used to the name calling that comes in when you go on to some programs. It has happened to me a few times, and a few threats on top of that. I'd like to make that very clear. Also, as a prerequisite, what I want to say, and I'm not trying to belittle anybody, but 3/4 of the crew on the USS Liberty had a top secret clearance. And I just wanted to make it clear to the audience, or how many's listening, that that top secret clearance was not given just anybody. They checked back into our the FBI, checked back into our background for about 2 to 3 generations. Matter of fact, I think they told me where my grandmother lived in Prague. So they were pretty good about checking your background. You weren't allowed
so you men were then of highly credible people, of considered to be highly credible and of great value, right?
You caught that. Thank you very much. Yes, and what I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows is that I don't know how it would be possible for these men to get together after the attack and become a bunch of racists, I guess you could call them, whatever you would call it, and are just shooting arrows into the wind to try to get a story across. It's just simply not true. And we can back this up. I like to say things I know that I can back up. And believe me, I've been at this for 54 years. And well, Bob knows that quite well. I even remember his Liberty plumbing and heating outfit in Rochester, New York. So on June 8th, 1967, I was not topside. Usually I do my interviews with Phil Turney. Right now, unless we surprised him, he's sitting at a restaurant right now. in Cedar Ridge, Colorado, because I just called him. And if we did call him, it would probably surprise the heck out of him. But the reason I like to have him on with me is because he was topside that morning. He saw a lot more than I did. So what I would tell you right now would not be eyewitness. It would be, I guess you could call hearsay. But none of these guys that I know of is ever going to tell me a lie about any of this. When I first woke up when I woke up that morning, I went to the shower and took care of all my needs before I went to breakfast. And there were some of my men were running around telling me that we were being circled by Israeli aircraft. And they were marked. They were marked aircraft, and they were so friendly that I think a couple of guys topside even waved at the pilots as they went by, and they went back. So, and how long they circled, I can't say, because that's why I like to have Phil Turney on here with me. But it was quite a length of time that morning, and it was enough to realize that we were flying the flag. It never did hang limp at the mast. And if people would check the weather back during that day, they'll find out there's about 12 knot wind. We were running around 3 to 5 knots ourselves. So there was enough to unfurl the flag. It was never hanging limp at the mast, not one time. And well, anyway, getting back to the day, I went to breakfast. And I told all the men that worked in my department that, hey, don't worry about this. We're being encircled by Israeli aircraft. They're friendly. They're not going to do nothing. And so don't let this kind of thing bother you. And so after breakfast, we went to work, all the guys. And I went topside that morning about, I think it was around 11:30. And I did observe a couple of what I think they called flying boxcars back then. I'm not a Air Force type guy, but I think they were like a C-135 if I'm not mistaken. And I'm not exactly sure what they were doing up there, but I know we were agreeing there was plenty of surveillance from the air that day. And I did observe one of them myself. I went to chow, and after chow at 1300, which is 1 p.m. in the afternoon military time, we were supposed to have a general quarters drill, and we did.
Let me ask you a question. When you observed the planes observing you, were the planes marked? Did you know?
Hard to tell from my standpoint, simply because they were up there so high. It was
okay.
Hard to tell. They were just up too high. And as I said, afterwards, we've known that there was plenty of surveillance from the air, and it wasn't just. I'm not going to get into that because I really don't know what I should know about it. I just know there were people afterwards that heard our distress calls and stuff like that. But I don't know if you're held to an hour on this or not. Are you?
No. We'll go over because we're going to look at the video also, which is an hour. So we'll be over. So don't worry about it.
Oh, okay. So the general quarters drill went quite well. The captain was very happy with the way that it went. And my general quarter station was up topside and I think pretty close to what they call the flying bridge. So it's pretty high up there. And so I left that and I went back to my workstation, and I had no sooner sit down. I heard a sound overhead. So now remember, I'm 2 decks down below the main deck, and I'd have to estimate, but I suppose it maybe that sound came from maybe 20 foot over my head, somewhere in that area that I didn't recognize. And being an old farm boy from Nebraska, originally from Nebraska, we had a lot of hail out there, and I could certainly remember when you hear hail hitting a tin roof, it makes quite a noise. Kind of what it sounded like to me. Still, I didn't recognize it for what it was. Well, what it was 9 of my shipmates were being killed topside on the main deck by the French Mirage jets that had started strafing the ship.
Wow.
And from down below, from where I was, I heard the sound of the strafing, didn't know what it was. I used every excuse I could think of because I just did not know what it was. I thought we'd run aground, all kinds of stuff just didn't make any sense. But later on in the attack, I think the attack by the aircraft lasted, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes. And they strafed us several times, and they did kill nine men topside. The next thing I heard that came over the ship's 1MC, which is the ship's intercom, came from the captain. And his message was simply this: prepare for a torpedo attack.
Wow.
Well, all of our watertight doors were already closed, which needed to be done. And everything that was needed to be done before any type of attack was taken care of. And so here's what I did. Still amazed what was going on around me, and thinking to myself, this kind of stuff only happens in the movies. And here it is happening to me and others, of course. And I went to prayer because I was actually praying for my life. I wanted to be spared. And I spent about 10 or 15 minutes maybe there, promising a lot of things to the good Lord that I knew it would never happen because I wouldn't be able to accomplish them. But you know what it's like when you're asking for your life. I guess you just say about anything. I walked back to my desk after the prayer, and here's what happened. And please don't anybody call for a straitjacket, because I'm telling you what happened. I heard a voice. I don't know if anybody else heard it. And that voice said simply this: get down, and get down now. I was standing at my desk and was so horrified, I guess. I know I didn't move to the deck. I know I didn't put myself on the deck. I know I was put on the deck with my nose to the steel plating, flat down, about 5 seconds, maybe 10 seconds before the torpedo exploded. This is the amazing thing about this, and I consider it a miracle. I consider it divine intervention. That standing at my desk and being put flat on the deck without even knowing how it got there, 5 to 10 seconds before the torpedo exploded. Well, I'll just leave it up to the other people that happen to be listening, what they might think it was. But the torpedo exploded. I heard the shrapnel flying through the air over my head, killing everybody in the compartment where I was at. Practically everyone died that day, and there was a couple that escaped too, but not very many of them. Maybe 2, maybe 3, I don't know. So anyway, the compartment filled instantly with water. I was wading in water about up to my shoulder, going towards the ladder that would lead to the deck up above, which I hoped would be dry, and it was. And there was a lot of men all trying to get up that ladder at the same time. And I don't remember what happened about how I got there. I got there fairly quickly, and the hatch was closed. But if you will, a hatch is made in a particular way that there's a small hole, and I shouldn't call it small, but there's a hole in the middle of the hatch called the scuttle. That can be opened up without opening up the whole hatch, and a body can pass through that hole. It's big enough. So as I reached the top of the ladder, a hand came down through that hole and grabbed me and pulled me straight up. I don't know who it was. Whoever it was had to be pretty strong, very, very strong to lift a body straight up out of the water down there below and pull him through that hole. I got through the hole and headed towards the main deck. It was dry up there, but I still wanted to get up to the main deck. So I headed to the main deck. I didn't quite get outside outside the hatch before Lieutenant George Golden stopped me and ordered me to turn around and go back down below and make sure that everybody had gotten out. So I wasn't too excited about following that order, but I knew that I better. So I did. I went back down below. By the time I got there, the hatch was wide open. I could hear the water sloshing down below, and I called out several times, and there was no answer. So I went back topside, sliding all over the place because the passageway was full of blood and water everywhere you went, and reported to Lieutenant Golden, who was trying to start the emergency generators, that I couldn't raise anybody down there. There was nobody hollered back when I hollered in down below. And so he let me go on outside. And as I went outside, all my shipmates were out there. The guys that had gotten out from down below are still alive, because there was other compartments close to the torpedo. And so a lot of those guys in other compartments did get out. There's no doubt about that. They did. And they were all out there slapping each other on the back and shaking each other's hands and just really happy to still be alive. Well, years later, Phil Turney, who has become a very good friend of mine, called me and said, Ron, do you know what I observed when you guys were out there shaking each other's hands and slapping each other on the back? You know what I saw? And I said, no. I said, you saw a bunch of guys happy to be alive. He said, you guys were out there slapping each other on the back, happy as you could be, and they were still firing at the ship, 50 caliber machine guns, still firing the ship. Those bullets were flying all over the place, and you guys act like there weren't nothing going on. I said, well, I'm sure that's probably true, because we were so excited about being alive that I suppose we ignored everything going on around us. And that's just something I'd throw in as a sidelight there, and something that someone might ponder a little bit. Why would these men not be getting down to, not be hit by, or to not get hit by this the machine gun fire? So anyway, as the day transpired and they finally left, we were still pretty all upset about the fact that we had a torpedo. They fired 5 torpedoes at us. They hit us with one. And I might observe right now for everybody that the torpedo hole, and still telling you the footage that they measured, because I don't exactly remember it, you could have drove a semi truck through it. That's how big the hole was. The professionals who looked at that hole when we were in dry dock in Malta said one thing, and I remember it more, that came from everyone. They could not figure out how the ship stayed afloat. And I know how it stayed afloat. I know that God saved us on that day. There's no doubt in my mind whatsoever. It was divine intervention. And those people that attacked us, I don't care what they hit us with, that it would not have went to the bottom, and it didn't go to the bottom. The following morning after the attack, the USS Davis come up alongside, and they were transported over, and they went down below with some of the Liberty crewmen and shored up the bulging bulkheads, because we were about ready to sink. I don't know how many bulkheads would have had to go after that hole was at the torpedo hole, but they were all bulging and they were close to going to just giving way, and the ship going to the bottom. Those men, without a doubt, some of the greatest heroes I think I've ever met in my life. And I want to say this because I respect every last one of them. To go down below lock yourself in, shore up the bulkhead so we didn't go to the bottom. Took a lot of courage. These guys did it. And I'm so very proud. They should have been the most highly decorated men in the whole United States Navy. All of them.
Did they get any medals of honor or anything for doing this?
Well, yes, we all got our medals and ribbons and what have you. It took a while because
Also, it's not done in the usual way. It was done in private ceremonies, so that most people didn't know about it.
oh, probably yeah. Actually, the thing about it is after this is all over with, and I kind of went through this fairly fast, Professor, but only because I thought my time was limited, and sorry about that. But after this is all over with, yes, we fought for 54 years. In the beginning, you could hardly mention it. You could be called names, you'd be called anti-Semitic, you could be called just about anything. And it was tough to go through things like that. And I know a lot of guys did. I went through it myself. I went through some situations that I think could have been considered threats. We were told at one reunion by a man that was unknown to me that what we were doing was hazardous to our health. Phil Turning, most specifically, has had his life threatened. I think he got in a real confrontation out in Los Angeles one time over a radio program he was doing, or TV, I can't remember which. So yes, it's been a tough road to hoe for 54 years. However, I do see a few things that I never saw in the beginning. And I do believe that more people are very much aware of what really went on here as opposed to what the government would like you to believe.
Yeah.
There's a lot more people than there ever was before. And as I said, I've been in it for a long time, and I've seen it go from literally nothing to what it is today. Liberty Veterans Association is quite well known now. They're going to be here for a while. They're planning to keep that organization going even after we're gone, because we all feel that, I guess I can't speak for everybody, but I'm sure they would say I'm correct when they would say that we've all stood for the truth, and we've been called everything but what we are. And I've done, I don't know how many testimonials. The best one I've ever did was at Liberty Fellowship in Kalispell, Montana. Pastor Chuck Baldwin had me just turn the mic over to me, and I told pretty much the same stories I told today. It was live streamed around the world, so I know that a lot of people got it. And there has been so many other crewmen, and that includes Bob. I know Bob wasn't on the ship, but I know that he has done plenty of talking about this. And I think, in my own personal opinion, that we have accomplished enough to get their attention. I really do. So,
From what I understand, President Johnson was threatened very seriously, and he was getting ready to run for re-election, and he had some very nasty threats thrown at him, and that was, the first of many thrown at politicians. I agree with you, Ron, that the tide seems to be turning. Maybe now with the new Israeli government, we might have a hope of something, but I don't know. It's still a very touchy issue, and I believe in a way it's an ethical, moral, spiritual issue. Right is right and wrong is wrong, and what happened to you guys is a violation of Jewish law, Jewish ethics. Comedies during recently, and he would not be at all happy with what the Israeli government has been doing because it violates Jewish ethical principles. And I think that the conflation of criticism of Israel into being anti-Semitic is a real disgrace, because Judaism has always stood for a high standard of ethical values, and Israel, unfortunately, has been violating them. But I hope you're right that the tide is changing. I'm hoping it is too.
Well, the thing is, I guess the bottom line with me as a chaplain for the Liberty Veterans Association comes kind of in so many ways spiritually, but President Coolidge, many years ago, said this publicly, and I think I can almost quote it word for word. That nation that forgets its defenders will be forgotten itself, or will be itself forgotten. That's how he put it. And if this nation insists on turning their back on their own people that have done everything to defend this country and paid with their lives,
That's right. That's
I
right.
think there's a natural law.
Yeah.
It's a law of any law you'll find in this country, in the whole world.
Yeah.
It's a natural law. And there's some things you cannot do, or this nation is gonna come under judgment if they're not already.
Absolutely.
And so if we're not seeing it, I don't know. All you can do is look around you. Things are not so good. So
yeah, I agree.
yeah, thank you.
Cousin Robert, cousin Bob, can you unmute yourself? I'd like to ask you a couple questions since you're so generous. And I love the painting behind you, by the way.
The narrative that said, well,
Unmute yourself.
some people were micromanaged, yeah, but it all
Sal, if you go to the lower left-hand part of the screen, there's a thing that
when
says
the Arab armies invaded Palestine.
uh,
When the Arab armies invaded Palestine, there was a war.
all right. Now, is he asking a question?
Over the world, so it was the war that was responsible for the making of
Brody, are you asking a question? You and let's listen to Robert. Robert, you were lucky to not be on the ship that day, but these were all of your colleagues, your people you were close to. The guy who replaced you, I understood, was killed. Yeah. So, what were you asked to take that vow of silence to afterwards, as well as the guys who were on the ship?
Well, I wasn't part of the check, so I was never asked to do anything because nobody knew where I was.
Good. So, your sound is not that great. I'm not sure why, but anyhow, we can still hear you. So, what's your take on what Ron is saying? Do you agree with him that things are getting better, that people will eventually come and acknowledge this this slaughter of Americans? What do you think?
It's sad that Congress never investigated this. Congress.
Robert, we can't hear you too well. Do you think, can you check your audio a little bit? Because you're going in and out.
I've had this problem before. And I don't know how to change it. So.
Yeah, okay. Let's try. Okay, Robert, you want to try to talk now?
Yes, can you hear me any better?
That's better. Yeah, that was better. Yeah.
I forgot where I was at. Ron told me like it is. The USS Liberty was on station in Africa when it was the Rhodes Bay, ready to go to a new destination. They had no idea they were going to the Middle East.
Right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, he said if you couldn't hear him that the ship was originally off the coast of Africa and they had no idea they were going to end up in the Middle East.
Yes, they went to Rhoda, Spain, and what they did is they brought on stores. And what they did is they brought on Israeli and Egyptian linguists and told the Spanish and Portuguese guys to leave the ship.
Oh, so that they went to Spain and they told the Spanish and Portuguese to leave the ship.
Yes, and what they did is they brought on Israeli and Arab linguists because they were being diverted to the Middle East, but they had no idea why they were going there.
Okay, so they knew they were going to the Middle East, but they didn't know why.
Yes, and Liberty departed out of Spain, and now they know they were going to the Middle East. It took several days for the ship to get there, but they arrived on station the morning of the attack. 6 a.m., the USS Liberty was spotted by a Israeli reconnaissance aircraft.
So it took them 7 days to get there. When they got there, they were immediately spotted by an Israeli aircraft.
Yes, and the Israeli duty officer went to Jane's fighting ships, and he found the Liberty in Jane's fighting ships, and he put a marker on the Israeli war board that this was the USS Liberty, and it was a neutral ship, an ally.
So the Israelis made a record that it was a USS ship. So they knew it was a USS ship.
Oh, yes, they knew, and they put the marker on the war board. And then between 6 a.m. and 2 p.m. in the afternoon, they overflew the ship at least 13 times to make a positive identification of the ship.
Ah, so they flew over the ship 13 times. So they knew damn well what was there.
Oh, they were quite aware of what the ship was. They one time they flew so close to the ship that the ship vibrated, and we think that the boxcar that was overflying the ship was taking pictures of the ship to try to identify this new thing that was on the aft part of the ship, and that was what we called our Triscom system.
Your what system?
It was called Triscom. It was a satellite that could hook up to the moon and make direct communications with the National Security Agency.
Wow. Okay, so this is really interesting. They flew so close that they vibrated the ship because they were taking pictures of this new satellite equipment
Yes.
that could actually send signals up to the moon and back to NSA.
And the problem is that the Israelis had no idea because the last photo they had of the ship was something that was in Jane's fighting ships. So here's this new piece of equipment on the aft part of the ship. What they had to do is they had to investigate. So they went to their intelligence agency and said, can you identify this piece of equipment? What does it do?
So they photographed this equipment but they didn't know what it was because it was new. So they sent it to their spy agencies to ask them what it was.
Yes. And I'm not sure what had come back because all of a sudden, I told you, in the afternoon, they called general quarters about 1 o'clock or 1 p.m. local time, and then 2 p.m. the attack began.
Yeah, so they called back general headquarters around 1 and 2 o'clock the attack began. So they knew exactly what they were doing.
Oh, they knew what they were doing. We even had reports from one of the pilots radioing back to Tel Aviv that this is an American ship. I could see the flag flying, and this pilot was told to return to base.
Yeah, so they saw the flag flying. The pilots reported it. It's just unbelievable. So what happened with information? Why, how much of it was given to the public and how much of it was concealed?
when the ship was finally, the ship was supposed to go to Malta because it had a lot of damage. They were going to take the ship and put the ship into Dreadnought so they could repair it to return it back home again. This is really interesting. John McCain, who everybody loves, our ex-senator, his dad was the admiral who came aboard the ship and told everybody, I know that we just had a problem. You don't talk to anybody. You don't talk to the press. You don't talk to your family. You don't talk to anybody. This was an accident.
So everybody was told to shut up, basically.
Yeah, I think Ron said that in the beginning. That these guys are told, don't say anything. Ron had mentioned that after the torpedo attack, you didn't know who was in the different spaces. Yes, I know that all that were in the one space were killed. The only one that survived was Joe Lentini. My space was right next door. That was the coordination space. And when I left the ship, Ron Campbell took my position, and Ron Campbell died in the attack. I know that survivors in that space, one was Dave Lewis, the other was Jeff Carpenter, and there was one other. Oh, it was Sarge. This was the wonderful Marine, Bryce Lockwood. And Bryce Lockwood, he survived, and he along with Ron was trying to get out of the space.
Okay, we losing you again. Yeah, you know what I wonder, did the survivors get any reparations or anything from Israeli government?
Yeah, it took a while, but yes, the reparations were paid to the families of those that were killed. I'm not sure about those that were wounded. I mean, we're talking about 174 guys that were wounded,
Right.
34 killed. How much do you pay each family? How do you put a value in life?
Let me ask Ron. Ron, do you know if, can you unmute yourself? Do you know if there was reparations paid to the guys who survived but, were injured and went through PTSD?
Some guys received payment for their the clothes that they lost or the personal possessions that they lost. That's all they got out of it. Most of the money went for the payment of the ship, whatever it took to repair the ship. Myself, I can personally say, I did receive several $1,000s, but it's only because I never stopped hounding the State Department. And then I also worked for the VA Medical Center, and I was given a 10% disability. Can you believe it? For post-traumatic stress disorder and a low back injury. And so they used that 10% and it gave me several $1,000s, which is a lot more than most of them got. And I couldn't consider myself very fortunate. So no, I don't think they came close to even the reparations were even close to what needed to be done. Of course, you have to remember back then that post-traumatic stress disorder was not even a part of the diagnostic manual that the doctors used. It was only called a certain name. It was not recognized by the VA other than combat, fatigue, stuff like that. So myself, I went to the VA Medical Center in Hot Springs, South Dakota. I was diagnosed, but not with that. It was some kind of a psychiatric term. I believe it was called psychoneurosis, something to that effect. Well, that was changed to PTSD when the VA recognized PTSD for what it was.
They finally start to recognize PTSD. When did that change happen with the VA?
I thought you might ask that and I really can't put my finger on the year that happened. All I can tell you is that it did happen, and I can also tell you that when it did happen, the VA changed mind almost immediately. And problem is that all these men, probably every one of them, suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder in one way, shape, or form. And because it wasn't recognized, there was no way they could even, ask for any reparations of any kind because it just wasn't recognized.
Yeah. Well,
It's a crazy thing.
I know. Well, the government. Thank you.
Yeah.
Robert, how did the other guys in the Navy? I mean, you weren't on the ship, but there were other sailors, other people in the Navy. Did you feel a sense of sympathy and concern by guys who were in the Navy but not on the ship? Were they upset about what happened?
Anyone in the military that knew about liberty,
They were upset. Every people in the military were upset. Yeah. Can't hear you. Work on your sound.
most of the guys were very sympathetic.
Yeah.
Jeff Carpenter, who survived,
It was said something.
he was one of the survivors. He wound up, I wound up going to Skaggs Island in California, and that's where I met with Jeff. Jeff was sent to California, and I was told, and I'm not sure if this is true, that no two people that were on the Liberty to the same place.
Could you say that again? You were told that.
Anybody that was part of the attack, they were told not to talk about it. No two people were sent to the same facility after the attack. When they sent the people on the Liberty, no two people went to the same facility.
I didn't hear the whole thing about. I know, but you said no two people, but I didn't hear the whole thing.
Yes, no two people were transferred off Liberty to the same facility.
Okay. Yeah, we're really having trouble hearing you, which is really a shame. Maybe we can do this again where, we can have more time and your audio will be a little better. I know my internet is not all that stable right now, so and it's after 4 o'clock, and I wanted to show the documentary "Dead in the Water," recommended by Robert, which I'd already seen myself. So, I want to thank Ron, and I thank my cousin Robert Bob Casale for sharing their experiences with us today. And I think Ron, one of the reasons that God kept you alive is because of today, is because you have to be a witness. Witnesses are very important in a prophetic way. That the witness is extremely important. Robert, your experience with the intelligence and sharing with us the details about the ship equipment was very interesting. I wasn't aware of that, so thank you for sharing. So you're a super spy. So I'm very proud of you, of your service and your brain. You got to be super smart to do all that stuff that you did. So I'm very proud of you, cuz, and very grateful to you for sharing your experience. That voice, who knows whose voice that was? That was definitely a voice from God. Whoever, whatever was used to get you in a safe position to keep you alive. So we're very grateful to that voice because that's why you're here with us today. So blessings on you, Ron, and thank you for sharing. And cousin Cassell, thank you for sharing. And so now what I'm going to do is play the video, the documentary, and we're over our time, but it goes about an hour. So if you want to start,
Wonder if I could say hello to Robert.
Yes. Hello, Ron.
Hey, how you doing, man?
I'm hanging in there as best I can.
I didn't hardly hear a thing you said because it's absolutely, it was just a garbled mess. I'm not sure why.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay, but just want to tell you howdy.
Howdy to you. I love to all everybody here.
I guess you'd have to repeat what he's saying, Professor. I just don't get it. I can't hear it.
Says howdy back. You guys, I can share the emails, the two of you, send you each other's your email and you can connect. I mean, it's great to have a reunion like this. I think, when you've gone through this kind of thing with somebody, there's a bond that stays over all the years, no matter how many years, guys are still connected.
Well, I appreciate it. I just wanted to say howdy, and I know you've got something else you want to do. I can't wait to see it.
Okay, great. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to share the screen and start the documentary. Hold on a minute. Drive. All right, let's go. Here we go. So here's this is a really fabulous documentary. It's very riveting, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. But I'll have it on the website. I make a YouTube of all these meetings, so you can't see the whole thing. You can check YouTube. Okay, I'll send you all the link. Okay, enjoy. Masalama.
A battered American ship pulled into the port of Valletta.
Well, let's start at the beginning. Okay.
One summer morning in 1967, a battered American ship pulled into the port of Valletta. 6 days earlier, on the 8th of June, the USS Liberty had been attacked. A torpedo had blown a huge hole in the ship's side, leaving her lower decks flooded.
Everybody in the space that I worked in died, except me.
Lost too was some of America's most sensitive electronic intelligence equipment, because the Liberty was a spy ship.
The Liberty should not have been here.
It was no enemy that tried to sink the Liberty. It was America's ally, Israel, then fighting its Arab neighbors in the Six-Day War. The survivors have always said the attack was no accident.
We were well known, and the attack was obviously deliberate. I consider it just cold-blooded murder of American sailors that day.
Yet Israel insists it was a tragic case of mistaken identity.
It's very embarrassing for a military force like the Israeli Defense Forces to make such a blunder, no doubt. But we admit our mistake. That does not mean that there was any intention or any conspiracy or anything of the sort.
But the men of the Liberty claim there was a conspiracy, and that it's been covered up for 35 years.
If it was an accident, it was the best planned accident I've ever heard of.
If Jews today can gather at their holiest site, the Wailing Wall, it's because the Six-Day War brought them control of Jerusalem's old city. It's also brought 35 years of violence, hatred, and bloodshed. Since 1967, Israel has become the dominant power in the Middle East, thanks to its alliance with the US.
It was a turning point in our relationship with Israel. Up until that point, we had avoided being a major arms supplier to Israel. Paradoxically, the security of Israel became one of our strategic objectives, which it had never been in the past.
For 35 years, the Liberty veterans have been campaigning for justice and a full inquiry into the attack on their ship.
We need you because it's what keeps us going. We can't do the things we want to do without your help.
We had never learned why it happened that day, why the ravage of war came in our way. We lost our husbands, sons, and wives, and there is no hope for us who land. Oh, the liberty.
For many young men in mid-60s America, joining the Navy was a good alternative to Army service.
It was kind of funny. I didn't want to go. It was Vietnam. My friends were coming back in body bags, and I put it off for a month. I got a second notice, and I figured I better do something, and I went and enlisted in the Navy, and went into the Navy, and 13 weeks later after boot camp, I got into the USS Liberty.
Rankowski didn't yet know it, but the Liberty would also be on her way to war. While America was distracted by Vietnam, the Soviet Union was extending its influence in the Middle East. It backed radical governments in Syria and Egypt, whose president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, had become the Arab world's chief spokesman in its struggle with Israel.
Egypt was under enormous pressure at the time, pressure by the Arab partners. I remember the Jordanians calling President Nasser and telling him, you are only bragging, you are not doing anything, you are letting down your Syrian allies and things like that. And they saw it as a necessity to do something to
Meanwhile, the USS Liberty had crossed the Atlantic, put in at the West African port of Abidjan. Some of the sailors were on leave and busy with their home movie cameras. The Liberty was an unarmed ship designed to listen in on electronic communications and pass intelligence on to the highest levels of the US government. There was no other ship like her. Her decks bristled with 45 antennas, and below were dozens of communications analysts and translators.
If it was broadcast on a radio wave, we could receive it at any frequency, low frequency, high frequency, medium frequency, very low frequency. It was out there, we could receive it. If we were listening and we heard a signal, and when we looked at it, we couldn't understand it, it was encrypted as well, we'd send it back to NSA and let them hit it with their computers.
NSA, the National Security Agency, is America's top secret organization for handling electronic intelligence. From its headquarters outside Washington, it controlled the Liberty as she cruised slowly along the west coast of Africa. In May '67, Nasser moved thousands of Egyptian troops into the previously demilitarized Sinai Peninsula. Israel and Egypt now confronted each other head-on, though the saber rattling didn't mean war was inevitable. Then Nasser raised the stakes. He closed the Straits of Tiran, cutting off the Israeli port of Eilat. Israel saw this as an act of war and began to mobilize. In fact, Hawks and the Israeli government had been waiting for a showdown with the Arabs. Both sides now prepared for war. Soon to be caught up in this was the USS Liberty. Her commander, William L. McGonigal, had been in the Navy since World War II. The crew included highly trained code breakers and radio experts, like Dave Lewis.
I was the research officer on the research ship. Commanding officer drove the ship. The executive officer was his assistant, and I was in charge of the 195 security group personnel. We were sent around the world, wherever there might be a hot spot, to see if we could determine what was going on and if the United States desired any intervention of any sort.
Life aboard the USS Liberty was like no other naval life. And in the 1960s, ships of that ilk operated independently. The commanding officer of the USS America, which was the flagship of the Sixth Fleet, didn't keep track of a ship that was sailing all by itself. When we were off duty, when the sailors were off duty, we went up topside and sunbathed. I mean, we wore pressed, starched, creased uniforms and spit shine shoes, and our fingernails were never dirty. I mean, we were slick.
McGonigal, he was a terrific person. We always on Sunday had a cookout on the front of the ship. Being aboard the ship was really something. It was fun, like going from Abidjan, Ivory Coast, all the way down to Cape Town. You're drifting along at 3 knots and listening 10 miles off the coast.
When the Liberty pulled into Abidjan, that was a social event of the year. I got back aboard at 2 o'clock in the morning the day we left. I was met at the gangway by Captain McGonigal, who informed me that we had orders to get underway immediately, and I was to get the rest of the troops, and we were getting underway.
In a sudden change of mission, the ship was ordered to head for the Middle East. "5,000 miles away in Washington, Israel's hardline spy master, Meir Amit, was making a secret visit to his friends in the CIA and the Pentagon. Amit's key meeting was with Robert McNamara, the U.S. Secretary of Defense. Amit wanted to know whether the Americans would back Israel if it struck the first blow. But the two men have very different memories of their encounter.
I told him, look, we don't want even one soldier from you. All what we want from you to stop the Russian coming into the arena, and number 2, to help us after the war. So when I finished, he asked me 2 questions. 1, how long it will take? I said 1 week. How many casualties? I told him less than the War of Independence. So I asked him, Mr. Secretary, what do you advise to me? Can I go home now or stay here until things will clear up? He said, no, you go home, your place is there now. I drew the conclusion that it was a green light.
Absolutely not. Because at that point, President Johnson and I and Dean Rusk had fully agreed that we must keep the U.S. in a position where if Israel called on us for military assistance to turn back the attack by Egypt and possibly turn back an attack by Egypt with the support of the Soviet Union, we had to be in a position that we could obtain the support of the American people and the Congress for applying military force in support of Israel. And we would not have that support if Israel had attacked Egypt. So our position was, no, don't initiate the attack. And I have no basis for believing that the Israeli you spoke of received any other indication from me than that.
That same night, a young NSA linguist named Alan Blue was suddenly dispatched to join the Liberty.
He was called in the middle of the night, around 2 o'clock in the morning, and he left the house. He went to NSA, and at noon the next day, he was on a plane to Rota, Spain. I'd never seen him that way. He was almost teary. He clung to me like he didn't when he had taken prior trips.
Alan Blue met the ship at the Spanish port of Rota. By now, the crew had been told they were heading for the Gaza Strip.
We knew that from the daily news that the Arab-Israeli situation was getting more and more hostile, that so far there was no war, but it looked to anybody who read the newspapers that there would soon be a war, and so we were sent out there, obviously, to listen to what was going on.
Early on the morning of Monday, the 5th of June, Israel went to war. Its planes pounded airfields in Sinai and the Suez Canal zone, destroying most of Egypt's air force.
These are the original shots taken by the gun cameras during the attacks on the Arab airfields.
The fact is that they didn't have a clue when we came, and they were completely caught by surprise. They were having breakfast, or immediately after breakfast, some coffee, and boof, up we came on 9 airfields, 2 in the Sinai, 5 in Egypt, and 2 in Upper Egypt. And then we had the second round, and the third round, and the fourth round.
Once again, the actual aerial combat shots taken by the Israeli gun cameras.
Meanwhile, the Soviet Union was boosting its military presence near the war zone. It moved 20 warships into the eastern Mediterranean. In response, the Pentagon ordered the 6th Fleet to keep all aircraft and ships at least 100 miles away from the coast. But one vessel received no such message. The USS Liberty steamed on towards the Sinai coast.
We were told there was no need to worry. We had asked Commander 6th Fleet for an armed guard to go along with us, a destroyer. He sent the message back saying we were in international waters, flying the American and there was no need for an armed escort.
The Liberty was approaching a scene of total Israeli victory. On the 3rd day of the war, they'd taken the West Bank. But the big prize was the capture of Jerusalem's old city.
I was elated when I heard it. Jerusalem, every Jew prays, I think, every day next year in Jerusalem.
That evening, the Liberty arrived at her destination, off the Sinai coast. Thursday, the 8th of June, dawned fine and clear. But the war was still raging, and Israeli planes flew out from the Sinai Peninsula to check on the Liberty.
Reveille was at 6. you got up, you showered and everything, and you go for a chow. But before that, we had heard that, like at 5 in the morning, or around that time, that the planes were buzzing us.
The Israeli aircraft seemed to be identifying the ship as belonging to their ally, America.
There were about 9 different occasions that airplanes came out, probably 12 times that were circled, 12 separate orbits of the ship during the morning.
Lloyd Painter relieved Ennis as officer of the deck. He too was reassured by the presence of the Israeli planes.
I remember vividly looking out through the portholes, looking down on the 01 level, and seeing all the officers sunbathing. And at the same time, we were being overflown, and I remember feeling very good and very warm inside that we were safe. They knew who we were. We were not a stranger out there that day.
Confident that the Israelis knew who they were, the Liberty men relaxed. A new flag was flying, visibility was perfect, and they'd received no orders to leave the area. That sense of security was about to be brutally shattered. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the officers on the bridge spotted 3 Delta Wing Mirage jets.
I saw them come at us. In fact, I was looking through the porthole when the jets came down and leveled off on us at attack attitude.
To my surprise, there were red flashes under the wings, and missiles, rockets started hitting the ship.
But the portholes were blown out instantly. Mine in my chest. The fellow next to me got it in his face. And we all went down on the deck with the force of the concussion from the glass.
The next thing I heard down in my space was a panicky announcement on the loudspeaker 1MC. General quarters, this is no drill. General quarters, ship is under attack. And you hear ping, 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 ping.
The decks above were being shredded. Attempts to send an SOS message failed. The Liberty's frequencies were being jammed.
You'd have to know what frequencies we were going to come up on. To know that, you'd have to know that we were an American ship. If you knew we were an American ship, you knew what frequencies we were going to be on because you knew what the fleet frequencies were. Duh. Hello.
The attackers knew their target, but they were keeping their own identity well hidden.
During the attack, no one saw any markings, and some of the men told me later that they made a special effort to identify them, and they swear that there were no markings, that these airplanes were unmarked.
They took out all of our transmitting antennas, and shortly thereafter deposited napalm on the deck. It appeared to me that it was the intent of the attacker to take out all communications and keep all people off deck so they couldn't reestablish any sort of antennas or communication system. If it was an accident, it was the best planned accident I've ever heard of. The only reason we got the SOS out was because my crazy troops were climbing the antenna string and long wires while they were being shot at.
At the end of the air attack, 8 men were dead and 75 injured. But the worst was yet to come.
We immediately cast off our lines and rushed out. I at least didn't know why. The sea was very calm and a bright day. I think it was around midday, or maybe a little before that, but around midday. And only on the way we were told there was a unknown vessel to the south of us or southwest of us, and we sped over in that direction. Very soon we did see a ship, clearly a naval vessel.
The last thing I remember is the captain on the intercom system saying, "Stand by for torpedo attack, starboard side."
Down below the waterline, the men in the engine room got ready to die.
Torpedoes coming in, it's going to open that boiler up, and you're going to die instantly. It's going to be like an atomic bomb
because that cold water hits that boiler, it's operating at full, there's just no hope. So all of us 19-year-olds, the best place to be is right there. You're going to get it. You're going to give it up right then and there. So torpedo attack, we waited, and they said it went by. And this went on like 4 different times.
The torpedo is simply dropped into the water. You lose sight of it for a minute, and then you see the wake, and it was going straight for the ship, and we were sure that our torpedo was the one that hit.
It hit, and it lifted the ship right out of the water and put it down, and we started to list 10 degrees. But it was a slow list, and it was going. And I said, my God, we're going to flip over.
I was one of the fortunate ones. A temporary bulkhead wrapped itself around me, and the heat of the torpedo exploded all of the paint onto my skin. So I was black, but it was all superficial. Lost both eardrums, got my eyes burnt a little, but I survived. Almost all of the troops within 20 feet of me were killed instantly.
We just went back to work and prayed that this thing was not going to flip over or if it was going to go down, and it didn't. That's about it for now.
The Liberty was now paralyzed, her power and steering control lost. But her desperate SOS message had been picked up by the American 6th Fleet, 500 miles away off Crete. Retaliation was ordered for the attack. On the USS America, 2 bombers were readied while their fighter escort was launched.
Those aircraft were brought forward, and I believe they were launched before we went into Condition November.
Condition November meant that nuclear-armed A-4 bombers were to be used. Incredibly, the US was about to launch a nuclear strike against Egypt, the Liberty's presumed attacker.
One of them was taxied forward to Cat 1, and it was it had like a shroud around the underside of the fuselage, and it had Marine guards escorting the A4. So that was a very unusual experience. I've never seen anything like that.
There was a flash message, as I recall, from one of the carriers that said they had launched ready aircraft. The launching of ready aircraft, you understand, that is typically nuclear-armed aircraft.
Cairo was about to be incinerated. The US Embassy was told that an attack was coming. Richard Parker was the political consul.
There was this message that the Navy was preparing to retaliate against Egypt for the attack on the Liberty. They thought that it was the Egyptians who attacked it. They were preparing to attack Egypt in response.
A few minutes later, Tony Hart passed a Pentagon message through to the Navy. Recall the aircraft.
My first thought was, as well, we don't want to do mushroom clouds. The recall probably is to rearm the aircraft.
About 10 minutes later, the USS America and Washington were connected by voice link. The Defense Secretary himself came on the line.
McNamara directed Comm 6 Fleet to recall the aircraft. And Comm 6 Fleet said, "Are you sure?" And he said, "Absolutely certain. Recall the aircraft."
The attack on the Liberty had triggered an extraordinary response. Nuclear-armed planes had been on their way to Cairo. A nuclear strike had been minutes away and had only just been averted. But it seems McNamara was also unwilling to send aircraft directly to help the Liberty. The fleet commander asked for permission to send a rescue flight of conventionally armed aircraft.
The admiral was talking to McNamara and asking for permission to relaunch the ready aircraft, relaunch any aircraft. And McNamara said no, that no aircraft were to be launched. McNamara is the boss, you know, he doesn't have to explain why he says what he says.
Dave Lewis heard from another officer about McNamara's dealings with the Sixth Fleet.
I'm Admiral Larry Geis, the commander of Task Force 60.
He was very upset. He told me he knew it was going to be hushed up, and I wasn't to say anything about it, but he had to get it off his chest. That he had sent aircraft and notified Washington, obviously via the Criticom network, because it got to Bob McNamara and Lyndon Johnson, and he had the aircraft recalled by Robert McNamara. So he said he reconfigured a flight of aircraft with aircraft incapable of carrying nuclear weaponry and relaunched it. He again notified Washington. Again, Robert McNamara ordered the aircraft recalled. He challenged the order, and Lyndon Johnson came on. Said he didn't give a damn if the ship sunk. He would not embarrass his allies.
Robert McNamara has never fully discussed his role in the Liberty controversy.
You recalled planes sent to rescue the Liberty.
I'm absolutely certain that's false.
You didn't send a signal to the Sixth Fleet?
Absolutely not. I don't know what the hell happened, and I haven't taken time to find out. But there are all of these claims that we sent planes, the planes were going out and we turned them around, and that we intentionally allowed the Israelis to sink the Liberty. I know nothing about it.
While the Sixth Fleet was launching and recalling its aircraft, the Liberty was still under attack by the Israeli torpedo boats.
You could see these machine gun bullets going through and ricocheting off all the metal that was down there. And actually, some were going into the boiler. They're trying to explode the boiler, and they knew what they were doing.
We basically were dead in the water. The word came down, prepare to abandon ship. That meant prepare only, go up and get ready, get near the life rafts. Well, I went up first, popped the hatch, looked out for the life rafts. They were either gone or burning. And at the same moment, I looked to the stern of the ship and I saw one of the torpedo boats methodically machine gunning one of our life rafts that had floated back. We cut the life rafts loose because they were burning or had been damaged. And they floated back behind us, and he was machine gunning the life raft. And I knew that had there been anyone in there, they certainly wouldn't be alive. It happened so fast, it didn't seem real. None of the attacks seemed real to me. I was bewildered. I couldn't understand why they would do it to us. I just didn't understand a thing at that point.
These guys didn't die for anything. They just died. They were slaughtered for nothing.
The assault was over, but the cover-up was about to begin. At 4 o'clock, the American naval attaché in Tel Aviv heard from the Defense Ministry that a ship had been attacked, in error. The American embassy immediately reported back to the State Department in Washington.
I was the first one that got the word. And my immediate reaction was it could not have been an accident.
Shortly before 10 in the morning, Washington time, the news was passed on to President Johnson.
He was rather inclined to agree with my view was that it had to have been an intended attack.
Johnson's belief that the attack was deliberate is preserved in the minutes of a White House meeting the following day. Also present was the CIA Director, Richard Helms.
And I know that for the first 24 hours, the president was furious that something like this had gone on.
Whatever Johnson's inner circle thought privately, officially they accepted Israel's apologies and its explanation.
Everybody seemed to be a little appalled at the Israelis, but this was not reflected in the public positions that the collective group had outside that room. And I think we were overprotective of the Israelis at that point. I think the feeling was that the pressure, political pressure would be too much and they were just going to let it go. That and thought maybe it would just go away. As a matter of fact, he said to me, standing in the cabinet room one day, have you looked at the New York Times? The attack on that American ship is on page 29, when it should have been on the front page. And then I guess various people got at him and so forth, and he changed his mind. But I don't think he changed his mind, he just changed his actions.
President Johnson's public stance allowed Israel also to cover up the attack. Israel has always maintained that it was a series of mistakes. None of the former fighter pilots would agree to speak, but one of the torpedo boat sailors gave us his account.
We were inexperienced at the time. We were probably a little trigger happy, and it was a war zone. No one should have been there, and anybody who is there is doing it at his own risk.
Israel admits the reconnaissance planes had identified the Liberty during the morning. The Air Force notified Naval HQ in Haifa, where the ship's position was marked on a combat information map. Later that morning, Navy HQ received reports of the Sinai coast being shelled from the sea. But by this time, say the Israelis, the Liberty had been erased from their naval map. When the patrol boats went to find the source of the alleged shelling, the only ship they found there was the Liberty. Then the patrol boats misread the mystery ship's speed on their radar. They thought it was making 28 knots, so could only be an enemy warship.
The way you do it is by taking the direction and distance from the radar to the target on the radar screen. And if you do it for a short period, for just several minutes, the differences in the speed can be fantastic. Anything between going backwards and 30 knots forward. So that's a very normal mistake.
And so the Air Force was summoned to catch the fast-moving target. Then, says Israel, the sailors made another fatal mistake, confusing the ship with the El Qusair, an Egyptian transport vessel half the Liberty's size.
It looked very similar to the El Qusair. There were some differences, and again, you have to remember that she had already been fired upon by the airplanes.
This was when word of the attack first reached the head of the Navy, who happened to be Udi Arel's father. He'd been at Haifa Harbor, out of radio contact, and had just got back to Navy HQ.
Of course I was furious. The minute she was torpedoed, and it was clear to me, actually, that she couldn't have made 28 knots. So I actually immediately ordered definite identification. And then he reported that the flag was going up, was being hoisted. And then his first identification was Soviet. I said, oh my God. Come closer. He came closer and he identified her as an American ship.
Whatever the ship's identity, the Israelis vehemently denied that they'd ever fire at life rafts in the water.
I don't believe it. I never saw such a thing. There was nothing even resembling a life raft. And we certainly didn't shoot at it.
We are taking part of the blame, but only part of the blame. We made most of the mistakes. They made many mistakes on the spot, and by the fact that the Liberty should not have been there.
But the evidence points to Israel knowing the ship's identity and wanting it sunk fast. This U.S. Air Force intelligence analyst was following radio intercepts of the attack.
The communications I had in my hands originated from an Israeli flight commander. Evidently, from his questioning to the ground control, one can deduce that he had been given specific orders to attack that ship before he left the ground. And when he saw it was an American ship, he questioned those orders. And he questioned those orders to his ground control. That same conversation that I had in my hands specifically noted that the ground control said, proceed with the attack. And there was still doubt in the Israeli pilot's mind. And he said, no, this is American. Repeat those orders again. And he was told flat out, do attack this ship.
That night was a very long night. I'm thinking at that point, I hope we don't sink, because I knew the extent of the damage. I'd been down and taken a look at it, and I knew that we were in bad, bad shape. We had a lot of dead folks, a lot of gravely wounded folks on that ship, including the captain, who toward the end of the shift, toward the end of the 15 hours, had regained consciousness and was sitting up in his chair, but not saying much, just sat.
Help was finally on its way. Ships from the 6th Fleet were steaming towards the Liberty and would reach her the next morning.
It was quite a sight to see so much of a flotilla there, the carriers. We looked and we said, God, what a flotilla. Where the hell were you? Why didn't you come? I mean, everybody aboard the ship said the same thing.
The Liberty was now heading to Malta for emergency repairs. An important visitor was helicoptered aboard. Admiral Isaac Kidd was leading a naval inquiry into the attack. His behavior surprised the sailors.
I thought he was a very strange person because he took his stars off and walked around, tried to walk around like a regular guy. You know, everybody knew who he was. But I thought that was rather strange. I didn't buy into that one real easy.
He took his eagles off, and he says, well, guys, he says, you just pretend that I'm one of you guys now. Tell me all about it. So they told what they seen in that, and after a while, he put his pins back on, and he says, I don't want you guys talking about this at all to anybody. Your shipmates don't be giving any interviews here while we're in Malta. He says, anything that has to be told through your division officer, through your captain, don't be talking to your family about it. I mean, he was very specific.
By this time, all the injured men had been taken aboard the rescue ships.
I remember being hauled up into that helicopter in a basket that had been wrapped tightly around me from head to toe. The corpsman, not knowing which end was up, sat on my head all the way back. And all I could think of was what an ignominious way to die after having survived a torpedo attack.
They took the wounded and the dead off and took them to the USS America, where we were then taken into their hospital area. That was when the Navy and the might of the United States Navy was really with us. Up until then, it hadn't been.
An unarmed American ship had been attacked by Israeli planes and boats. 34 sailors were dead, and the U.S. had done nothing to help. For the first time in 35 years, we can explain why. The theories cast light on the tangled web of American-Israeli relations. Some people suspect the ship might have been overhearing information on Israeli operations in the Sinai.
I think they intended to attack the ship. Exactly why they wanted to, I'm not sure. They may have felt we were, with the Liberty, we were listening into some conversations and other things that were going on that they didn't want us to know about. And they had been engaged in some pretty outlandish stuff in the course of the war. And I didn't think they wanted us to know all the detail of that.
I don't think that we would have cared. America was not an enemy. There was nothing they could in any way involve us, threaten us, concern us. No. I don't even know what were the task of the Liberty. What the purpose? To find out how the war was going on? I don't know.
was a broader theory, that the attack was intended to be blamed on Egypt and would therefore draw America into the war, and was carried out with the foreknowledge of certain people in Washington. The Liberty's captain had always suspected this was the case. In 1997, at Arlington Cemetery, he broke his 30-year silence.
For many years, I had wanted to believe that the attack on the Liberty was pure error. It appears to me that it was not a pure case of mistaken identity. I think that it's about time that the state of Israel and the United States government provide the crew members of the Liberty and the rest of the American people the facts of what happened and why it came about that the Liberty was attacked 30 years ago today.
Less than 2 years later, McGonigal himself would be buried at Arlington. Shortly before he died, he sent an open letter to President Clinton, calling for Israel to acknowledge publicly that her armed forces had deliberately attacked the USS Liberty.
Captain McGonigal was more than just a captain in the Navy. He was a friend. He was a sailor's captain.
Towards the end of his life, McGonigal confided in his old friend, the chief engineer.
Captain and I was real close, and every time I'd see him while he was in the hospital, he would cry, and he called me a few years, 2 or 3 years before he died. He was going to be in Washington for me to come up there, and I sat in the room with him. We chatted a while, and then he got started telling me that those SOBs really did us in. George, I said, what are you talking about?
McGonigal went on to say that if the Liberty had been sunk with all hands, the blame would naturally fall on Egypt and her Soviet backer.
We were guinea pigs to be sunk, and then we could say Egypt and Russia did it. That way the United States could have stepped right in and helped Israel.
We found evidence that this was part of a larger plan hatched by Israeli and American intelligence to invade Egypt and overthrow Nasser, a plan codenamed Cyanide. A key figure was James Angleton, Israel's closest friend in the CIA, and unique beneficiary of a memorial from Mossad. Jim Ennis first came across cyanide almost by chance.
I had gone to the LBJ library asking for, all Liberty documents, and this one-page paper came out of nowhere. Minutes from the 303 committee.
The 303 committee was a secret group that used to meet at the old executive office building, around the corner from the White House.
303 committee was simply a device for examining covert operations of any kind and making a judgment on behalf of the president so he wouldn't be nailed with the thing if it failed.
Here in April 1967, the committee met to discuss a sensitive Defense Department project. It would involve the Liberty with a highly risky submarine operation to help Israel. Scribbled on the minutes is a note: submarine within UAR waters, another term for Egypt.
Especially the fact that this was in the Liberty file suggested that this had to do with the submarine that was near us and with cyanide and all the other things.
Dave Lewis had also heard about cyanide. One of his officers had told him the ship was carrying secret documents in connection with a submarine project.
He said, there are sealed orders in my safe for Project Cyanide that involves communication via submarine in case of war. That's all I know about it. The orders were never opened. The attack took place. There wasn't time. I don't know what they said.
What connection could this mysterious submarine have had with the Liberty? And why was it being discussed a full 2 months in advance of the war? The operation is still so sensitive that we could get no comment from US or Israeli intelligence.
Operation Sinai. If I heard about it, I heard so.
What was it?
I suggest we stop the interview here. What do you say? Why you want it?
Why would you not be able to speak about Operation Cyanide? It's 34 years since.
Signature and loyalty to my country.
Is it very sensitive?
I'm big, so, and I know exactly what I'm able to tell you, and I know exactly where I stop. And here I stop.
Operation Cyanide was a joint Israeli-American venture using submarines and other covert-type intelligence gathering efforts against the UAR. But that has a logical explanation. The explanation is the UAR was totally Soviet equipped. They had Soviet advisors. So the Soviet Union was our arch enemy at the time. And we were concerned in a volatile Mideast situation with the Soviet problem. We were concerned wherever the Soviets showed up. And they had considerable influence in the United Arab Republic. So there were these joint ventures with Israeli intelligence.
We were strategic and tactical reconnaissance photo processing specialists. We flew probably 8 missions that day. All bomb damage assessment. All airports in disarray. Lines of aircraft destroyed in place. From what we saw in that film, it was unchallengeable destruction of the enemy.
This covert operation was also part of Cyanide. Before the war, the team had secretly been sent to an Israeli air base in the Negev desert. The men wore unmarked uniforms and had no ID, while 4 American reconnaissance planes were disguised as Israeli.
There was a hurry-up paint job done to the aircraft to identify them as Israeli aircraft, so that they would be in conformance with normal Israeli markings.
No, not one single word of it is true. I don't know what is the man. I don't know. Fantasy. It's a fantasy. He's dreaming. He's making it up. Nothing.
They can deny it now. Fine. Take a look at the reconnaissance information that the Israelis have that was published publicly in Time magazine, Life magazine, I think Look magazine. That was our work. The Israelis had no reconnaissance aircraft, and you can't get the detail off of gun cameras that was in those films.
If it's true that America was secretly in the war against Egypt, this had to be kept quiet at all costs.
Well, the implication would be very serious. I mean, first of all, it means that LBJ and his people around him have been lying to us through their teeth. And that may be a minor matter for most people, but it'd be important to us. But more important, it would mean an American participation in the attack on Egypt. A very serious thing for us to have done. And it would have, finished our relations with the Arab world for a long time to come. As it was, 6 Arab states broke relations with us.
Whatever lies behind the attack, The human tragedy was that 34 young men were dead. Most were killed below decks, and their remains could only be removed when the Liberty finally arrived at Malta. By then, the bodies of 5 others had drifted out of the hole. Only when the dock was drained did the full horror of the destruction become apparent.
I remember taking that photograph, and I remember seeing parts of bodies in the cables and wiring that were jammed around it, especially in the top part. It seemed like on the overhead, a lot of parts of bodies were hanging there. It looked like a meat locker. We had to go down and start cleaning that up.
One of the men killed was Alan Blue, the NSA linguist so suddenly sent abroad. His wife didn't even know he was on the USS Liberty.
I was sitting in a park in Washington, D.C., having my lunch about 1 o'clock in the afternoon on June 8. It was a beautiful, clear, sunny day. And about 15, 20 feet away from me, someone had a radio.
Administration handling of the June Arab-Israeli war crisis.
And I overheard this report on their radio that an American ship had been attacked in the Mediterranean. And my heart sank. Even though I did not know he was on that ship, I was still very frightened. I picked up my lunch. I went inside to my office. I called NSA, and they said, yes, we've been looking for you.
Alan Blue was later buried at Arlington National Cemetery. For the previous month, his widow had had to share her house with minders from the NSA. They told her nothing and controlled her contact with the outside world.
I think they were anxious to not have any press around us at that time. No one from the NSA ever contacted me to explain what happened. There were many, many people at the service. I'm not sure who they all were.
In Malta, meanwhile, the Liberty men were alarmed by the way Admiral Kidd was steering the naval inquiry. He seemed to have made up his mind in advance and was ignoring crucial evidence.
I testified about 3 major items that I had witnessed. One was the captain's condition. I also testified about the armor-piercing projectiles that had been sent through our ship. And I also testified about the machine gunning of the life rafts by the Israeli torpedo boats. I testified, like I said, for about 2.5, 3 hours. I didn't know until, I don't remember, months later, that much of my testimony was never recorded.
McGonigal had blacked out during the attack, so the chief engineer took command of the ship. Yet the inquiry wasn't interested in what he had to say.
I got so peeved off I couldn't see straight. Before it broke up, I stood outside the door and wanted to go in there so that I could get my say in those minutes that were being taken. But he wanted to keep me out of that almost completely.
The report was reviewed at the Navy's European headquarters by Merlin Starring, later the Navy's top lawyer. It didn't appear to support Kidd's conclusion that Israel had attacked in error.
Well, I simply could not find an evidentiary basis for that conclusion. I had considerable trouble with the record in attempting to, as I read through it, attempting to find the evidence, the testimony, or other evidence that would support some of the findings or opinions or conclusions that the Court of Inquiry had drafted and had reached.
Today, even after 35 years, the Liberty incident remains so sensitive that the U.S. Navy refuses to comment on it.
I think there was a cover-up. I think there were details known from talking with some of those crew. It was pretty bad.
How can my personal view be other than my American view, which was that they intended to attack this ship, and there's no excuse that can be found for saying that this was just a mistake?
Most importantly, President Johnson, like Richard Helms, would also have been getting the radio intercepts.
It's like a cable or a telex, right, that was sent to all the intelligence agencies and to the White House at the same time, because it was an American ship being attacked by a friendly power. Anything that's inimical and dangerous to the United States that the president has to see on a near real-time basis, he has to receive it.
Did Johnson order a cover-up?
No, that I'm aware of.
But people were sworn to secrecy. The naval inquiry is regarded by many as incomplete.
You asked McNamara about those questions. I'm not going to answer those.
I am not saying anything about the Liberty, period.
In Israel, it was soon business as usual. An inquiry attended by the Navy chief, Shlomo Arel, concluded that the attack was mainly due to a series of Israeli blunders. Despite this, nobody was charged or court-martialed.
They didn't find anyone guilty of committing any crime or negligence or whatever. But this is, I don't want to make apologies for that, because it was outside my jurisdiction.
After a month in Malta, the Liberty was patched up and ready to begin her journey home.
It was pretty eerie because we had to stand watches different times down where the torpedo had hit. We had to check for leaks, and you could smell the fuel oil, and it was so eerie.
Blanchard, seaman. Alan Blue, civilian. Jury convert.
Sorry, Sorry, I skipped it by accident. Let me get back where we were.
You know, your shipmates were just down there, and you'd swear that they were talking to you.
We arrived to fanfare, to local press, and Miss Norfolk, Miss Hospitality, Miss everybody. Anyway, they got us in and got us tied up, and all inside was nothing but just shell of the ship. Nothing was left. One of the things that bothered me for years was coming home. I'd survived all that other stuff, but the coming home part and facing people who had lost their loved ones, that was very difficult. Very, very difficult.
The men had been ordered never to talk about the attack under threat of court-martial. Now the Navy scattered them, and no two were posted together. Even their medals were awarded secretively.
I remember receiving my Purple Heart in the captain's office in Bremerhaven, Germany, and with the warning, don't ever tell anyone where you got it. Don't ever. I knew at that time that things had gone terribly wrong with what had happened to us. I knew something was up, and so I basically made a decision to get out of the Navy, and I finished off my obligation, resigned my commission, and left the Navy.
Captain McGonigal was given America's highest award, but with little ceremony.
That's the only Congressional Medal of Honor that I'm familiar with that was not presented by the President of the United States. It's normal protocol for the President to present the CMH. It was presented by the Secretary of the Navy at the Navy Yard, a little base down in southeast Washington, rather than at the White House by the President.
Well, certainly, I think it was the way that the Navy and the White House handled this was a travesty. Johnson didn't want this thing publicized. He thought it would harm relations with Israel and his relations with Jews in the United States.
For Liberty, if you were commanding officer at that time. For the officers and men of Liberty, I accept this presidential unit citation, and I would add my own personal appreciation for their professional devotion to duty.
Every one of our citations talks about military action, occasionally mentions enemy action, but never mentions that it was the state of Israel.
For heroic achievement in connection with the unprovoked and unexpected armed attack on USS Liberty in the Eastern Mediterranean on 8th of June, 1967. A Silver Star Medal to Lieutenant George H. Golden. 3 times control to stand by for torpedo attack.
I witnessed a cover-up take place of the highest magnitude. I witnessed someone receiving the highest medal of the land, someone being promoted, someone given his choice of duty in the Navy for his silence. Nothing more, nothing less. And the silence paid off. The captain never stepped forward until the end of his life. And I only think what could have been if he'd have stepped forward in 1967.
But a presidential election was coming up. Nobody in power wanted to let questions about the USS Liberty spoil relations with victorious Israel.
I think it should have caused more of a problem than it did. We went on in official reactions to each other, and we renewed our old friendships, considered we really ignored it for all practical purposes, and we shouldn't have. It was a very bad thing.
If you want to win a war quickly, there will be more mistakes, unfortunately. But that's the result of those mistakes, is that you have won the war in 6 days. So this is the price you have to pay. Unfortunately, the price in this case, one of the prices, was the Liberty ship.
Israel today still occupies the conquered Palestinian territories, thanks to continued U.S. support. The war of only 6 days has left a painful legacy of suspicion, suffering, and sorrow. Among those living with that legacy are the Liberty survivors, bitter about their own government's cover-up. Jim Ennis spent years trying to find out what had really happened.
This book will be with me as long as I'm here. I've often said I'd like to have seen it go away years ago. I would have hoped that my book would have generated a congressional investigation that would have answered the remaining questions, and the whole thing could have been put to rest, and there'd be no question about what happened and why, and we just put it on. We all go on to other things.
Jerry Goss, Petty Officer. Melvin Smith, Chief Petty Officer. Carl Noah, Seaman. John Spicer, Petty Officer. Gary Blanchard, Seaman. Alan Blue, Civilian. Jerry Converse, Petty Officer.
There's 34 guys that can't talk. And there's 34 families that need some answers. And there's the rest of the crew that needs some answers too.
I really don't have any malice against the guys who pulled the triggers, because they were the guys that were given orders, do it, because if you don't do it, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. I would like to meet those guys and see what they had to say to me. People who gave the orders, they got away with murder.
The BBC 4 Zone returns to BBC 2 next Tuesday with a profile.
Well, that's certainly a very powerful film. I thank all of you who have kept watching, people on Facebook, Kamal and Khalid, Eugene, Muhammad, Nawal, and somebody's name is in Arabic that I can't read. I think it begins with an F. Fadi, is it? I don't know. Anyhow, so thank you for hanging in to discuss this really very serious issue, and I think we're going to have some further sessions on it because as the two survivors, Robert Casal, my cousin, and Ron, Reverend Ron Kukal, said the time has come now that he thinks that we have a better chance now than before to have this brought to light. So thank you very much, and I wish you all a wonderful week. Thank you, and see you next Sunday. Ma salama.